Welcome back to another episode of the vlog. Change of scenery. We are currently in, where are we?
I think we're in Virginia. National Harbor?
Okay, well, we're currently at the MGM here. As you guys can see, Alexander's with us, Wolfgang Poker, one of your favorite vloggers. We're gonna be hopping into the 510 streets here at the MGM. The property is unbelievable. I did not realize that. We come from LA and you know, like they're casinos, but they're not actually casinos. So to see something in this magnitude, it literally looks like the SoFi Center in LA where the Chargers and the Rams play. Let's hop into today's session. Let's get into some fun. Let's see what MGM has to offer. At this point, we find ourselves here after a long day of travel in the lovely casino, which is the MGM National Harbor. This is a wonderful time. I am very excited. I'm stoked to be here. There's a couple of things I want to get into quickly. This session is going to be about half of it going to be a 2-5, and the second half, which is really insane, is going to be a 5-10 game. Anyways, the very first hand to go over, we look down at ace queen offsuit. I go ahead and raise to $25 from the hijack. The button and a small blind make the call. We're going off to a flop that comes king, 10, deuce, 2 spades. The action starts with me. I go ahead and make the c-bet for $20. And at this point, I noticed that the button made the call. Didn't really realize that until right now. Pre-flop at least. He ends up making the call. The big blind folds. We're going off to a turn card that comes to 7 of spades. Action starts off with me. At this point, I decide to bet out $75, to which my opponent decides to make the call. And the river comes the queen of diamonds. At this point, I could go for some thin value on some planets, but just not on this planet. I decide to check it, hoping to get it to showdown. He pretty quickly decides to check it back. We showdown a queen, and it is good. Our opponent says that we rivered him. Luckily for us, honestly, I feel like we were ahead the whole time. In this following hand, not a great deal has gone on. We've been pretty much just paying the blinds and maybe raising and taking it a couple of hands here and there. And this next hand, we find ourselves in a really advantageous situation when we look down at ace queen and there are 3 blinds out there. I decide to raise to $30. We have one caller from the button. Everyone else decides to fold. We're going off to a flop heads up. That is very, very juicy as it comes ace, queen, deuce, rainbow. Action starts off me. We pretty much destroy this flop, so I don't need to be betting very large here. We're going to be really, really far ahead of my opponent here. And anyways, I've just noticed that people on the East Coast like to really take small bets for some reason as signs of weakness. So I bet $20. My opponent thinks it is a sign of weakness and decides to raise to $50. Don't know what this really means, but I know what I need to do. I decide to raise him up here on the flop, 3-betting it. He made it $55. It's my turn to make it a little more expensive. I made $135, and he ends up making the call. The turn card comes at 3 of diamonds. When he checks it over to me, it's time to bomb this turn card, going over the size of the pot if I can. I've got to get as much money as I can in the middle, allowing myself to have a reasonable SPR to jam here on the final card. When the opponent checks it over to me, I decide to bet $350. He thinks that's a pretty reasonable price as he ends up making the call. I'm going off to a river, hoping to see a brick. The river comes a reasonably bricky card as he comes to 4 clubs. The backdoor flush draw bricks out, and only a hand like specifically 5-6 of diamonds or ace-5 of diamonds now makes a straight. So I'm not really worried about those hands in particular, considering I did 3-bet the flop. My opponent can have some of those hands sometimes, but in reality, his player type being an older gentleman, I doubt that that'd be the case. I think for the most part, I'm going to be targeting a hand like ace-jack, ace-king, ace-10, and just some random junk like that as well. Maybe even ace-deuce. With the action on me, I decide to bet $700, making him go all in. He goes into the tank before eventually deciding on making the call. We announce 2 pair, and he ends up showing us ace-5 of diamonds. Unfortunately, he did have one of those hands that decided to raise the flop for whatever reason, and then we ended up bombing the turn. He ended up making the incorrect call, but that's just poker. I'm happy with my sizings here. Unfortunately, on that river, maybe I value on myself, maybe not. I mean, in reality, he's probably going to be jamming that river, and I can never fold, but it is what it is. I guess at the end of the day, maybe I just got a little nit rolled. Who knows? The point being, things are not going well in the 2-5 streets. So at this point, I just pretty much am licking my wounds. And Wolfgang is kind enough to invite me over to his table, which seems to be a little more lively, and some friends of the vlog. So I decide to oblige and make the table switch over. In this very first hand, we look down in a straddle In a situation that's pretty interesting as the hijack decides to open at $35, the button makes a call. I'm going to straddle with the hand that I definitely would like to 3-bet at some frequency. Ace deuce of clubs is beautiful. I end up just making the call, taking the least variable route as possible. The flop comes queen, jack, deuce with 2 spades and a diamond. Action starts off with me. I decide to check, continuing to play in flow. The initial raiser decides to c-bet for $50. The button folds, action back onto me. If we're going to be, calling this pre-flop, seems like it's pretty reasonable and almost obliged for me to make the call. So I go ahead and do just that, hoping to improve in some fashion. The turn card comes a 4 of hearts with the action still on me. I decide to check it over to him, and he pretty quickly decides to check it back. The river comes a deuce of diamonds. Well, things have changed quite drastically. And the best part of this hand, and the reason I added it, is because this is a pretty fun little table talk situation. I end up bombing this river. It's pretty likely that I'll end up here with a bluff as the flush draw misses and the straight draws miss. So at this point, it's time to crank up the intensity. I make it $250, and let's listen in on some really fun table talk here.
Literally no idea.
You can do it right now.
Yeah, can we call time out? Let me watch this.
Yeah. I'll be totally honest with you. The last time I was bluffing you. I had ace-10 with only the ace of diamonds, but I had to bluff.
Yeah, this time you're...
This time, it'd be a very good idea for me to bet with value. Totally honest. That doesn't mean I'll do it, but I mean I should be. I have the best hand even if I'm bluffing, I think. I think a jack is the best hand. Unless you have ace jack, then a little different. then whoa. Then it's a little different. Then I should probably stop talking.
Yeah.
Ace deuce.
As you guys saw there, after a bit of tanking, my opponent does end up making the call, as it's unlikely that I'm going to have it every time here, and just a hand before I did something similar with the bluff. Happy to take that pot down, and hopefully this is just a foreshadowing of what's to come in today's session. Moving right along, middle position decides to raise to $20. I'm next to act, sitting around the hijack late position. I decide to make the call here with king jack offsuit. Definitely would like to be 3-betting this pre-flop. I don't like just calling this, although I will say this is a friend of the vlog, and maybe we want to just mix things up. It is what it is. We end up going off to a flop that comes queen 10-6 with 2 clubs. I look down at my hand, and in fact, I do have the king of clubs, which is a really nice backdoor situation. Not to mention, we do flop ourselves an open-ender to the nuts. When the action starts off with my opponent, he decides to bet $20, and I pretty quickly decide to make the raise to $80. It'd be nice to get my hand here down immediately with just king high, and if I don't, I still have equity going out to the nuts. On top of that, we still have a backdoor to the second nut flush, and then over to this board texture. What's really appalling to me almost is my opponent decides to 3-bet this flop to $225. Don't know what this means. Maybe this is a sign of a really strong range. I can definitely put my opponent on a hand like queens, 10s, 6s, all the flop sets, all the 2 pairs, all the top pairs, top kickers, but with a draw to the nuts, it'd be really foolish to throw this away now. I can call and at least evaluate on the turn, which is what I end up doing. I make the call. The turn card comes the 8 of diamonds. Doesn't change a whole lot to the board texture. When I check it over to my opponent, he decides on betting $250. Seems like I'm still getting a reasonable price to outdraw my opponent. Again, the big thing that I need to say is that my opponent has about $700 remaining in his stack, and if I'm able to hit one of my gin cards, I still do feel like if it doesn't come a club, my opponent may have a really hard time folding. And even if it does come a club, because I am holding the king of clubs, I'm really doubting my opponent ever has a flush draw, especially when he decides to 3-bet that flop. Anyways, I end up making the call, hoping to improve, and we do, as the river comes the ace of clubs. Sure, that does bring a flush, but I'm not too worried about that. It's really hard to imagine he has any combinations of holdings that don't include the ace of clubs as a 3-bet on the flop. I mean, I have the king of clubs, the ace of clubs is accounted for, the queen of clubs is accounted for, so we're pretty much only worried about, I guess, jack 10 of clubs. Sure, that can exist, but I just can't be scared of one single holding. And it'd be really interesting and very crazy for, I think, my opponent to 3-bet a flop with a flush draw and a pair. Maybe it's possible, maybe not, who knows. I have no idea and no background on any of this player pool or really anything about East Coast poker. When I check it over to him, he decides to bet $400, leaving himself $300 behind. And if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and try to get all the money in the middle. Like I said, I've put him on a set this entire way. So I go ahead and make the jam here. He's shown strength the entire way through. I don't think this ace of clubs should change very much. He decides to call immediately. He instantly shows me that he has 10-5 of clubs. So, luckily for him, he was a sub of the vlog. So, I don't mind giving it over to him. Just really unfortunate with the outcome there. Did not think he could ever have 10-5 of clubs. Pretty nasty way to lose there, but we're going to have to lick our wounds and just make with what we have. And we're going to have to lick our wounds and just make do with what we have. At this point, we've been, very much in the mix. Things haven't been going my way, but that's never stopped me before, and it's not going to stop me today. I don't care if I had to travel across the United States. I'm here to make some money. In this next hand, a lot of action is going on here, so let me fill you in all the action. The straddle is on in this hand for $10. Early position decides to make it $35. Another player from early position decides to make the call. And at this point, the cutoff decides to 3-bet here to $125. The cutoff has well over $1,500 in his stack. He's been mixing it up for sure. When the action's on to me in the small blind, we look down at a beautiful pocket tens. Sure, we can just make the call here and fold a ton of flops, and that's probably the more theoretically sound thing to do. But the one thing you will learn from watching my vlogs is I'm going to deviate wherever I see fit. This seems like a pretty fit spot. I can probably get my opponent to call off or stack off pretty weak. It's hard to tell. Again, I don't have a lot of experience with these players, but I do have a pair. I do have America's second least favorite pair, just followed behind jacks. So I end up 4-betting to $350. Folds back all the way to my opponent here who decided to 3-bet. He goes slightly into the tank before eventually deciding on a fold. We're going to take it, chipping up, feeling good, feeling great. We're making a comeback this session, I can promise you that. So here we are at the second half of the vlog, and I promise you this thing is just getting started. We're just hopping into the rodeo. I promise you guys, we're going to be riding the bull. I don't even know what the heck that means, but it sounded cool when I said it. Anyways, in this next hand, early position decides to make a limp. Next to act decides to isolate for $40. A gentleman here, an older gentleman, possibly an OMC, don't want to make any assumptions yet, decides to 3-bet to $125. Pretty small 3-bet sizing, all things considered, as there is an early position limp. But when we look down at Queen Jack offsuit here from the straddle or the big blind, I decided to make the call here fairly loose, but pretty easy to play against this player type post flop. The initial raiser who got 3-bet decides to make the call. We're going 3 ways off to a flop that comes Jack 8-3 rainbow. Great flop for our hand, especially when the action ends up checking through. This is good for 2 reasons. 1, more than likely I have the best hand at this point. 2, we're able to control the size of the pot and possibly lead out on some turns or rivers. The turn card is one of the cards that I can never lead out on as it comes the ace of hearts. It does bring a backdoor flush draw. When I check it over to my opponent, there is a resounding lack of aggression as no one takes a bait. No one uses the scare card as a bet card. We're going off to river after everyone checks the action through for a second time, which comes the 4 of hearts. This does complete the backdoor flush draw, and we're not holding a heart. When the action checks over to the initial raiser, he decides to use this as a bet finally. He bets $350. The 3-better decides to make the fold, not very happy. And when the action's on me, I end up pausing and thinking to myself, okay, can my opponent ever go for thin value with an ace here? Sure he can. And if that's the case, and if he can be going that thin, especially with this sizing, why don't we penalize him for doing so? I end up deciding to go massive, and I decide to raise to $1,200. My opponent could not fold his hand fast enough. Very happy, using a really weird line to make some money. My opponent ends up folding. Sure, he can have a complete air ball, but if we can ever get him to fold a better hand, that feels amazing. And just like that, we're starting to get this show on the road. To be honest, quite some time has passed from the last 10, well over an hour. When we look down at the next playable hand, or at least the next playable situation, the straddle is on, and I am that straddle. Early position decides to make it $65. We're playing 6-handed at this point. The action's on to me with 7-6 offsuit. Not great, not bad. We end up making the call here, defending our straddle. We're going off to a flop that comes King, Jack, 7, rainbow. The action starts off with me. I check the play and flow. At this point, my opponent decides to down bet to $55. I don't think I'm going to be folding bottom pair here this time around, especially to a smaller bet. So I end up making the call. We're going off to a turn card that comes Gin, a 6. This does bring a backdoor flush draw, and with that being the case, I use this opportunity to bomb it. Going for the size of the pot here, I decided to bet $235, and my opponent is thinking about it for a moment before eventually making the call. Don't know exactly what my opponent has. It's tough to put him on anything in particular. And when the river comes, a queen, I am in a little bit of a kerfuffle. The reason I say that is a lot of the hands that I'm targeting now improve to 2 pair, and some combo draws end up making a straight, and moreover, it's unlikely that I can go for value on this river. With all that being said, I end up deciding to check it over to my opponent to see what he decides to do. He should be checking this river back at, some reasonable frequency at the time, so I'd rather check my showdown value or allow him to bluff. He ends up doing neither. He ends up betting $680. Whether that's a bluff or value, we won't know just yet. I am in the tank here trying to figure out exactly what my opponent has. Can he ever turn a hand like ace-king into a bluff? Probably not. That might be a little too strong. Can he ever turn a hand like jack-10 into a bluff? Maybe. That seems like a great candidate. It's hard to tell. Again, I have no ability to make any reads on certain players yet. I've been playing with this guy for about 3 minutes, as he is a new addition to the table. After quite some tanking, and considering how bad of a player I can be, I end up making the call. Sure enough, our opponent did river a straight. Just the grossest one I could think of, as he has ace-10 offsuit. He ended up calling the turn with, 4 outs, less than 10% equity, and just binking the river. Unfortunate for us. I don't really know what to say besides I did everything I was supposed to. I bet really massive on the turn for him to make the fold. And if he calls there, he's just torching money on fire. The only thing that's unfortunate is for how great I played in the previous hand, I just gave it all back in this hand. I played horrible. The river is just a slam dunk fold, and it's unfortunate that I just couldn't get away from it. I should know better. This next hand may give you some deja vu, so buckle up. This following hand, I'm in the big blind. Under the gun decides to limp. We're still playing about 6-handed or 7-handed at this point. Small blind limps as well. We look down at 9-5 offsuit. I'm going to go ahead and check this option all day. Horrible hand to look at. Don't even want to play it until the flop comes king 9-5 with 2 clubs and a spade. Who would have thought that a hand this horrible would end up being this strong? When the action starts off with me, I decided to take over the betting reins as I bet $25 going for a larger sizing. The under the gun limper decides to make the call. He is a European friend of the older variety. This is almost like a unicorn in the poker community. It seems like all the Euros are regs from Germany and robots, as they can calculate improbable equations in their head almost instantly. Our opponent here does not seem to be capable of any of those things, but he's a very fun player to have at the table and definitely playing in a really funky way. He ends up making the call. The other opponent decides to make the fold. We're going off to a turn card that comes with queen of spades. There's now 2 flush draws out there, as well as another overcard to my 2 pair. It can be very likely for my opponent to have a hand like jack-10 and now improve, or a hand like king-queen and improve. But alas, we find ourselves here and in a need to bet to protect the equity of our hand and charge some big draws. With the action on me, I decided to bet $65, a little bit on the larger side, I know, but the thing that blows everyone away is my opponent decides to raise to $250. Besides a hand like king-queen and jack-10, I'm not really losing to a great deal, and although I really don't know what he can be doing this that's inferior value-wise, I don't think I can make the fold just yet, so I end up making the call. We're going off to a river card. The river card comes a deuce of hearts, absolute brick-a-rooney. The action starts off with me. I can't bet here, so I go ahead and check. The action's now on my opponent, who decides to bet $275. A really milky value bet. Not going large here, so he's definitely not polarizing himself. And at this point, I'm deep into the tank. When he goes for the sizing, I doubt my opponent has jack-10. I think he should be betting a little bit larger with a nutted hand like that. Maybe he has a hand like king-queen or king-9, and this is just an absolute cooler. At the end of the day, I'm just not a hero. I can't find myself in the hero's cape of folding, so I end up making the call, and to my surprise, my opponent shows king-ace. You heard that correctly. He limped with ace-king and just called on the flop and sprung the trap on a really dynamic turn card. I don't know why he did that, but he took himself to Value Town. And for that reason, we're going to go ahead and have to show him a one-way ticket on his way. We end up taking a really big pot, coming our way, finally able to break the shackles off and really run free. At this point, our session is almost coming to a close, but there's still some more important hands to go over. We're playing 6-handed still to this point. Under the gun decides to make it $35. I find myself in position, and I decide to 3-bet to $150 after looking down at pocket jacks. My opponent decides to make the call. We're going heads up to a flop that comes ace, 6, 7, rainbow. The opponent checks it over to me, and considering that I'm either way ahead or way behind, I end up checking it back and evaluating. And evaluating we do as a turn card comes an ace pairing the board, making it less likely that my opponent holds an ace. The weird thing is my opponent doesn't seem to mind that, as he decides to bet $150. Can never fold here, so I end up making the call. We're going off to a river that comes a deuce. Doesn't change anything to the board texture. And again, the weird situation I find myself in is my opponent betting for what is perceived to be some form of value. He bets $300 and the action's on me. After a bit of thinking, I just can never fold here. I'm way too high up in my range, I think. Sure, I can have some aces that play in this way, but what's more likely is that I'm going to go ahead and call, as this is near the top of my range as mentioned. My opponent proudly shows pocket eights. Unfortunately, that's not going to be good, my good sir. And a huge shout out to this opponent, DC Lore. He's a gentleman. He was a ton of fun to play with and actually has been on the Hustler stream himself. Hopefully we can play later on, my good sir. DC Lawyer is awesome. Unfortunately for you, brother, I did take this pot down. But luckily for us as a community, close to broke is heading in the right direction, which is back to black. This next hand is probably my favorite hand of the session, and it actually is the final hand of the session, so let's hop right into it. The straddle is on it. I am that straddle. Early position decides to limp. The button makes it $100, who, for all intents and purposes, is not very interesting of a person. He was a complete jerk to me at the table, and, you know, I don't need to share names. I don't even know it. But if it counts for anything, I am taking this a little personal, as he was a jerk to me, so I'm looking to get after him, especially when we look down at Jack 8. Not a great hand, it is off suit, and sure, I'm only human. Maybe my emotions are getting the best of me, but I'll try to do my best to play this post-flop. I end up making the call for $100 as he isolated, or the initial limper. The limper makes a call as well. We're going off 3 ways to a flop that comes Queen, 10, 7, Rainbow. We check it over to the initial raiser, who decides to bet $175 as a c-bet. Considering I did call pre-flop and we now flopped ourselves some equity, I end up making the call, and so does the other villain. We're going 3 ways to a turn card that comes a 6. This doesn't change a great deal. When the action starts off with me, I end up checking it, and the action checks through. The river card comes the Ace of Hearts. Why is this important? This should be better for my opponent's range than mine, but it is nearly impossible for any of my opponents to have King Jack. The initial raiser should definitely be c-betting that turn card, even if he has King Jack, because he needs to be taking the pot down with King High at some frequency. And moreover, it's good to bet with a hand like that, as there is still some outs to the nuts. The other thing I will add is that, because I am blocking a Jack, it's very likely that I can have that in my range. Anyways, not to discredit anybody else from having a strong hand, that's not the point. The point is, we're first to act, and we're going to go massive. I end up deciding to bet for $1,200. The first player decides to quickly fold. Now the action's on the second player, who thinks about it for quite some time before eventually making the fold. I hold no grudges. I got my happiness. I took the pot down. That's enough for me to be happy with. For that gentleman, though, if you're having to watch this, you should probably be a little, less miserable at the table. You should be polite to the people, especially people that are coming here and playing in your poker room. Try not to be a jerk to them. Anyways, that'll do it for my little rant there. I appreciate you guys as always. You guys are wonderful, great people, and I'm super lucky to have you guys. Let's throw it over to me in person and see how we feel after today's session. Well, that brings us to an end of today's session here. I don't know what it is about casinos and waterfalls, but every casino I attend, for some reason, has a waterfall. We just got the car from the valet, and the session is over. We have some numbers and some details to go over, so let me walk through that with you. The 5-10 lineup was definitely a little rough, and the 2-5 game, I did my best to make it action-packed. It was all right, but I think in the later video, who knows when you'll see Wolfgang's video, maybe like years from now, but I think he'll attest to it being a little slow, especially after I left, because I'd like to drive the action up. The one thing I did notice is that a lot of these pros are overfolding in the 5-10 game, I think, and that's just good for me and bad for them. Numbers, because that's what matters. We played 2 sessions today in the same thing, as you guys saw. We hopped into the 2-5. We lost $1,555. We were in for $285 and out for $1,300. And for the 5-10 game, we did better than that. I mean, we did better, luckily. We were into the 5-10 game for $3,200 and out for $45.55, so that was a positive 13 to 55. A lot of 55s for some reason. Anyways, we ended up losing $200 on today's session. I'm gonna live with that. It's all right for my first session here in Baltimore, or wherever the hell. We're at the MGM Grand National, so I don't even know what state we're in, because everything's so connected. Anyways, I appreciate you guys as always for coming through and supporting the videos. It means the world to me. Hope you guys have a great day. Get excited because the scenery is being changed. We're gonna be playing quite a bit here in this tri-state area. I don't even know what this is called, but there's a bunch of different states here. Anyways, that's gonna be a farewell for myself, Wolfgang. You'll never, I don't want to spoil his session, but you'll see in about 3.5 years.
Good little session.
Have a nice day, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Stay happy, stay healthy, more pulling. Wanna go to the tables. Deuces.
La, la, la,